Now on the first day of the week, at very early dawn, they came back to the tomb bringing fragrances and spices they had prepared. This was the followers of Jesus, Mary and other women, going to the tomb of Jesus, taking fragrances and spices for the body of Jesus. Now, the Egyptians, what they did with their dead is that they would prepare them to become mummies, and they would last for hundreds and thousands of years. And today we see even movies about mummies that were preserved because they had a special treatment for the bodies, and this preserved them for hundreds and thousands of years. The Jews, though, had a belief in the scripture. The scripture says that you are dust and you should return to the dust. So therefore, they didn't preserve the body of the dead, but they would allow it to decompose and become dust again. So now there was a problem with this. The problem was that they weren't in the ground, they were in caves. The dead were put into caves. And in the caves, since they weren't in the ground, this would produce a tremendous odor, a really bad odor, as we know. So to be able to kind of neutralize that odor a little bit, because this cave where Jesus was placed was pretty much in a position where people could pass by and smell the odor if it rotted. So they would take the spices to neutralize the odor of the decomposing body. So the plan of Mary and the other women that were with her was actually to take spices to neutralize the odor that the body of Jesus would produce when it started decomposing. So this was a tremendous act of lack of faith. This was a tremendous act of lack of faith in what Jesus had promised. Jesus had promised that he would, yes, die, yes, be crucified, and yes, be in a tomb. But he promised he would resurrect the third day. So if he promised he would resurrect the third day, these women were taking spices to Jesus on the third day. So they were expecting Jesus to start smelling on the fourth day. So after the third day is when the decomposing starts. So these women were expecting Jesus to start smelling. So since they were expecting Jesus to start smelling, they took these spices to neutralize the smell. So in other words, if Jesus wouldn't resurrect, it would mean that he failed to his word. In other words, these women were acting on the expectancy of the failure of Jesus. They weren't acting in the expectancy of the victory of Jesus. They were acting in the expectancy of the failure of Jesus. And you see, I feel like a lot of times we doubt God so much. We follow God. These women followed Jesus. These women believed in Jesus. These women knew that Jesus had power to raise people from the dead. But when it came to this situation, it was so hard to believe that they literally prepared for Jesus to fail. You see, and you can't follow Jesus and expect him to fail, because Jesus doesn't fail. You can't prepare for the failure of God. There's a saying in the business industry that says, put all your cookies in one jar and look after that jar. In other words, put all your expectation, all your effort, all your time into one business. That's one strategy of business. There's many, but one of them says that. Okay? So when you look at faith, and you decide to follow Jesus and you decide to follow God, you have to put all your cookies in one jar. That jar is called Jesus. And you can't have a backup plan just in case Jesus fails. See, these women had a backup plan just in case Jesus failed. So you can't have different jars and say, if Jesus doesn't work, if the promise of God doesn't happen, if he doesn't come through after all, this is what I plan to do. That's you taking spices to a tomb. You know what? That's a terrible idea. Why? Because these spices were expensive spices. They weren't cheap spices. Spices back in the day were pretty expensive. Good smelling things back in the day, good oils that smelled well, was pretty expensive back in those days. It wasn't like you could go to Macy's and get a cologne, get a perfume, or you could go to State of Rose and get some Febreze. That wasn't the case. All right? The case was that they had to actually pay really high prices for oils that smelled good. So they invested money in the failure of Jesus. You see, it's funny, but they were investing money. They were betting on Jesus failing. And if you ever bet on Jesus failing, you're going to lose every time. Because Jesus just doesn't fail. That's not his way. He doesn't work that way. He wins every battle. He wins every war. He's never going to fail. You could fail. The people around you could fail. The world will fail. The political system will fail. Everything will fail, but there's only one that won't fail, and that's Jesus. So you could bet on everything around you failing and be prepared for failure around you, but never be prepared for the failure of Jesus, because Jesus will prove you wrong. Just like he proved these women wrong. The third day, they take the oil. They're ready to cover Jesus with good smelling oil so that he doesn't smell as bad as he should. They are ready to bet on the failure of Jesus. When they're there, they take the spices. And guess what? Jesus isn't there. They were prepared for a problem that never existed. They were prepared for a problem that never took place. They wanted to solve something that they could never solve, because Jesus had already resurrected. Don't try to solve problems that Jesus already solved. Don't prepare for the failure of Jesus. Prepare for his victory. What they should have done is go to the tomb expecting to see nobody.